Good afternoon and welcome to the Athens City Planning Commission. It's January 21st, 12:01 p.m. and I will be presiding today, but I think we have some business to take care of before I start presiding.
We do.
Okay.
We do. You can go ahead and start if you want to.
So it appears as though we, when the last vacancy occurred with Austin, when he left the board, Austin was the vice chair of the Planning Commission, and we never appointed a new vice chair, and our chair is absent today. So I would like to make a motion that we appoint Chris Nisley as the vice chair of the Planning Commission in order to preside over the meeting.
And I will second.
Okay.
Discussion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Yeah, you're abstaining.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Now we'll begin the business of the meeting. We do have a quorum today, and our next item of business is disposition of the minutes for the December 17th, 2025 meeting. And all of us have received copies of that. Are there any corrections or additions? And if not, I'd accept a motion to approve.
I move.
Do you have a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. The next items are cases, and the first one is the Hugh White Honda annexation. Yes,
We need to swear in anyone who wishes to speak during today's meeting.
thank
My
you.
apologies. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Thank you. I'm counting on everyone to keep me
You want me to do
in
it?
line. So we always swear folks in who might be presenting information or asking questions. So if you intend to do that, or think you might, if you'd raise your right hand and swear that the information that you provide today will be the truth to the best of your knowledge. Okay, thank you very much. Now we'll move on with the cases. And the first one is the Hugh White Honda annexation with recommended zoning. And do we have updates from the code office about this?
Sure. So, as you all may remember, the annexation related to the Hugh White Honda property has moved forward to council, but they do need a recommended zone designation from the Planning Commission. The current existing zoning around that property, I believe, is B3, and I believe that would be appropriate for this property, but the Planning Commission is definitely able to discuss that option.
Okay. Comments from commission members about this? Any discussion?
Yeah, this is a perfunctory exercise. Ultimately, we really should have done this before when we recommended annexation, but I guess we didn't explicitly say we recommend to be the same zoning as the parcel that it's attached to. Mm-hmm. So, I think it's logical that it's B3 because everything else there is B3, and that's what it's going to be used for, is a B3 type business.
And it keeps it consistent for the record so that we have the history of it, so I think that's helpful. And do we have any other discussion or questions? If not, a motion to...
I move.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I second.
All those in favor of approving the zoning for B3 for the parcel for the Hugh White Honda annexation, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so that's been approved. The next is the Neighborhood Corridor Overlay Zone, and City Planner Megan Jennings and Co-Director David Riggs have been working away on this and compiling a summary of the public comments that I think may have begun. Some of the initial conversation was actually almost a year ago in February at the new firehouse. And I know very last minute I sent some questions over to you, and I apologize for them being so late, but if we could open up the discussion for that, because I know that you are interested if we can resolve all the questions we have today. If it's possible to move this case forward, that would be ideal, but we'll see what happens.
Sure, yeah. So just a brief review, the public comment that or I guess our public open house that we hosted about a year ago, that was integral in shaping the actual language that we have drafted, and we first presented to the Planning Commission in December. After that meeting, there was discussion about potential edits that needed to be made to the code, and so that is what I've brought forward today. Within the packet, I think the first copy of the code is our it's like the entire red line document, because this is all new code. All of the text is going to be that bold, capitalized red and underlined. So I made a secondary version of that has the previously discussed code from the December meeting in black with the edits made in the red, just so it's easier for the planning commission members to track what the changes are. So I'll review those really quick, and then I do have a supplementary document that I put together today, just based on things that I thought about last night, essentially, things I had forgotten. And then I do also want to answer your questions, because I did review those before this meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so first, the first edit we made was related to the discussion about any properties that may be along one of these neighborhood corridors that are zoned residential and do not allow for commercial uses, and how our proposed prohibition of residential uses on the ground floor in order to achieve that mixed use and retail presence along these corridors may affect those residentially zoned properties. So under our permitted and prohibited uses, on page 16 of the packet, item B reads, when the base zoning district does not allow for commercial uses, the commercial uses as permitted in the B1 zoning district shall be permitted on the ground floor of all buildings. We specifically chose the B1 zoning district and the uses permitted within because those are already scaled for neighborhoods, and we found that those uses would be appropriate for these neighborhood corridors. Are there any questions about that proposed edit, or should I go through all of them and then we do questions at the end? Is there a preference?
I think it's helpful Madam Chair, I think it's helpful to ask for questions after each of the edits, because it is somewhat complicated. So
Okay, all right. So if that's all right with you, we'll say, any questions on this? This is page 16 of 44 of our documents, and it's talking about when it doesn't allow for commercial uses, the commercial uses as permitted in the B1 zoning shall be permitted on the ground floor. And the following land uses are limited then. So those specific, that's not the inclusive list of all the possibilities, but it is saying that those 7 listings would be limited to 1,500 square feet, and that's printing and related trade, welding, blacksmithing, foundry, electric foundry, casting lightweight non-ferrous metals, and other metal working shop.
Yeah, so the land uses that you just reviewed are kind of item 2 on our edits.
Oh, got it. Okay.
But I can go into that if you would like to continue that conversation, or we can stay focused on the language
Let's
above.
just do the language on the B.
Okay.
Yeah. The B.
So ultimately, because I think one of the concerns the last time was that with the goal of, okay, do you end up putting this overlay zone in a residential area, and do you end up basically prohibiting first floor residential in a place where we don't intend to do that per se? And so this is the correction to that, which is basically to when the underlying zoning is allows for that, and then B1 ultimately ends up being over the underlying zoning. Did I say that correctly? So that
Essentially, yes. I think there are neighborhood corridors whose zoning hasn't been updated in a long time, so we may have some remnant residential zoning in those areas, and in order to encourage and allow for that neighborhood scale commercial where it's appropriate, just due to the nature of the corridor itself, this language would allow for those uses to exist without having to go through the zone change process, but only within this overlay zone.
Okay.
I think about West Union Street. Like if we were to apply this all the way out West Union Street for a portion of it, there are some older zoning in that particular area that maybe are from eras long past, and there are first floor residential in some places, and if we were to overlay this for the entire way to achieve what we would want, we basically would prohibit that unless this change were made.
Okay. Yes, and Ms. Rapp.
I just wanted to be clear, because I wanted to address the prohibition of first floor residential in this area, and a change to this would allow first floor residential and not
It would
outright
not.
prohibit it?
It
not.
would allow for the prohibition without putting a residentially zoned property in basically a conflict of their zoning and what the overlay zone allows. They would not be allowed to have residential, but that's what they're zoned for. So this new language that's added for this meeting allows for them to have B1 zoning or like commercial uses on that ground floor, but then the rest of the structure can be used for residential.
And why do we want to outright prohibit residential on the first floor? I understand that some of the neighboring businesses can potentially be in conflict with the residents there, but in light of a housing shortage, why does it benefit us to prohibit residential?
We have noticed throughout the history of, I guess, especially student rental growth, that structures that used to be commercial have been converted to student rentals or other residential uses. Our neighborhoods are really suffering because they don't have access to those neighborhood scale commercial uses that benefit those residents, and then also help provide those types of services in a walkable way, rather than having to rely on a vehicle to get out to East State Street or uptown here to Court Street for those types of commercial uses. So the goal of the overlay zone really is to encourage mixed-use buildings, so we still have the residential uses up above, and we allow for existing commercial buildings to add those residential uses if they're able to meet our reduced parking requirements and other property development requirements that we're proposing in the overlay zone. But then also keep the retail component of a neighborhood corridor present and allow for these neighborhood corridors to continue to serve the neighborhoods in that commercial capacity.
Any other questions?
I mean, just to add on to that, I mean, if we were to never prohibit first floor residential, like and just allow the market to take hold, there wouldn't be any first floor businesses in large portions of the city because the market pressure is student rentals. Right. And not that student rentals are bad, people need a place to live, but the market pressure would do that. And so that's one of the reasons our zoning is the way it is, that first floor residential is prohibited in some places.
All right. We'll move on to that next listing of the 7 businesses.
Sure, yeah. So the next proposed edit that we have brought forward today since our discussion at the December meeting is related to allowing for artisan scale type industrial uses. So item C under permitted and prohibited uses lists those typically industrial type land uses that may be utilized for or by an artist. So that's where we bring in the printing, welding, blacksmithing, foundry and electric foundry, and casting of metals and other metal working shops. And our proposal to keep them at that artisan scale is to limit those land uses to 1,500 square feet.
Yeah, go ahead.
I really appreciate, us changing this. I believe I was pretty firm in suggesting that we do this for artisan scale, especially in light of the glass blowing shop, a hot house that currently exists in that same corridor anyway. And, in my lived experience and being in so many cities across this nation and living in 13 in my lifetime, that this is so typical within, different sections of municipalities to where you are building up with the allowance of this at the 1,500 square foot spaces. You're really creating a micro community that is conducive to seeing more local artisans having kind of a space and shared allyship with other artists in this particular corridor, which, if you think about it in the long run, from a commerce standpoint and attracting people to come to Athens, something like this would also continue to improve our community, improve our local economy, certainly improve this corridor, because we've already put great pains into creating an already significant change to the Stimson Avenue corridor. So I just, to me, this is perfect for what we need in our community.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this section? Okay, we'll move on now.
All right, the third edit is related to our discussion about projections into the right-of-way and finding a way to allow for things like projecting signs, canopies, and balconies to be built within the overlay zone without having to go to council for approval of their Title 49 permit. The language that's in the packet, I finished up yesterday afternoon and then had some additional thoughts or got some additional answers from other staff yesterday evening. So this is where the supplemental sheet that I have printed off today, and I do have extra copies for anyone in the audience. Just a couple here. These are my thoughts on maybe how to modify the language for the projections into the right-of-way section. So first, I'm just going to read through the alternative language. My proposed language reads, projections into the right-of-way. Projections shall have ministerial approval of Title 49 permits if they are in compliance with the following regulations. First, which I have highlighted and I'll get on that later, all projections into the right-of-way shall submit proof of insurance with permit application to the Department of Code Enforcement. The second item is allowable projections shall be projecting signs, canopies, and balconies. Item number 3 reads, projections shall not protrude more than 2 feet into the right-of-way and shall maintain a minimum mounting height of the lower edge of the projection of 8 feet from the sidewalk level of the premises. And the fourth item reads, projecting signs shall be installed in compliance with B2D projecting signs regulations as detailed in Athens City Code 23.03.13 I1G, and that section is titled Projecting Signs in the B2D Zone. The reason why I kind of modified the language, at first I feel like the ministerial language is a little bit more clear than stating an exception. I think the ministerial approval is a little bit more clear in interpreting that. I'll leave the highlighted section for last. Item number 2, I wanted to be clear about what the allowable projections could be. And then number 3, just basically to interpret that, a projection cannot come out over into the right-of-way more than 2 feet in depth, and then also has to be at least 8 feet above the sidewalk for the sake of vertical clearance. And then number 4 is just referring to the current language that we have in our code related to projecting signs in the B2D zone, and that includes maximum square footage of the sign itself. And I believe that's really the only additional language in that section of code. But I did want to point back to our allowable signs in our uptown area. I highlighted item number 1 because there was a suggestion from another city staff member to require some sort of insurance for those projections since they'll be in the right-of-way, but I wasn't quite sure if there was existing code that related to that, and whether or not the Planning Commission would want to include that type of requirement for projections. So I'm willing to, well, not willing to, I am looking for advice on how to modify that language if it's necessary.
Questions or comments?
I mean, that currently matches Title 49, right? I mean, we require that for Title 49 already, so, and I think the ministerial approval arrangement basically says that you're automatically granted a Title 49 permit if you comply with these provisions. So, and one of the benefits of Title 49 is it can be snatched back, basically, if there's a safety problem associated with it. You know, it can be revoked if there's a safety problem. And all this is doing ultimately is streamlining a redevelopment, whereas as opposed to having, if you're in compliance with this, you simply wouldn't have to go before council and get a special use of the right-of-way permit in these instances. And so I think that's probably better than what you had originally written, which was making it exempt.
Right.
So,
I have just two comments, or a question, actually. Ministerial, I'm assuming means departmental, administrative, okay. And then the only other comment would be under item 2, allowable projections shall be. I'd say shall only. And then if there are exceptions, that if there are things that come in that aren't projecting signs, canopies, or balconies, then they would need to go through some kind of process. Yes.
I just have one question about what is the current regulation for the B2D with the right-of-way of a sign? You said it's based on square inches, is it?
Give me 1 second to scroll to that section in the code, which I don't have internet, so I'm hoping it loads. Okay, I'm gonna have to pull it up on my phone. The sign regulations for projecting signs in the B2D, I actually borrowed that 2-foot projection into the right-of-way language from that section in the code, and then also that 8-foot vertical height clearance. Give me 2 seconds just to pull up our code on my phone.
Well, it's good if you did, because I just wanted to, for those who were here today, I think maybe a great example is the new Kane sign that is on, 62 South Court, or whatever Kane's address is, as well as Pliable, which I believe mounted their sign up there too. So it gives you a good point of reference as to what this looks like versus having a pole sign, which is just absolute street pollution, in my opinion, especially in this corridor to where you've got something that is more conducive to foot traffic rather than vehicles traveling up and down.
Mayor, I've got the language from the B2D sign regulations if you'd like for me to read that section of code. Okay. All right, so this is 23.03.13I1G. It reads, projecting signs in the B2D zone. For a sign which is not parallel to and fixed flat against a building, the maximum sign area shall not exceed 8 square feet, with a maximum dimension of 3 1/2 feet in any direction. In no case is more than one projecting sign permitted on a premise or use. The minimum mounting height of the lower edge of signs not parallel to and fixed to a building in the downtown business zone shall be 8 feet from sidewalk level of the premises. In no case shall the top of the sign exceed 14 feet. The horizontal clearance between the sign's outer dimension and the curb line shall be not less than 2 feet.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other, yes, questions?
In the spirit
comments?
of being uncomplicated, I believe our sign portion of our zoning code is the longest section of city code that exists.
Yeah.
It's true.
Okay, all right. So that sounds, I think we've answered questions and comments, and
Yes.
That looks like a good addition and clarifies, and I think answers all the questions I had this morning that I sent on to you.
Okay, yes. I think you did have just a couple more questions that I haven't addressed yet.
Other things, yeah.
Okay. Do you want to ask those, or do you want me to read your questions that you emailed?
Why don't you just
Okay.
scroll down, you've got it up in front of you,
Yeah.
and that would be fine, and you can
Okay.
just address them.
Okay.
We got simple answers to it, I'm sure.
Yes. So, Chair Nisley, you emailed earlier and had just a couple of additional questions. First, you stated that both the Near East Neighborhood Association and the Far East Neighborhood Association have expressed interest in the 8-foot sidewalk component of pedestrian accessibility. And you ask, how do we set priorities about sidewalk repairs / expansions as part of a neighborhood corridor overlay zone, or just a sidewalk itself? And then you state, I remember your comment that the Near East Neighborhood Association may not need a neighborhood corridor overlay zone. So we had talked previously after the last meeting about whether or not this overlay zone could be applied to an entire neighborhood. For me, the goal of the overlay zone being neighborhood corridor specific, is to provide commercial uses along the main arteries that already kind of have an existing commercial presence, so that the neighborhoods that are directly abutting them have more direct and walkable access to commercial uses and services and amenities that they may need, that they may only have access to currently out on East State Street or uptown. So I believe that applying the overlay zone to an entire neighborhood is not appropriate, because the main goal is to increase that commercial component on the corridors itself. And we wanted to focus also on the corridors because of their access to public transit and other multimodal amenities, essentially.
Okay, thanks. Good.
Okay. Your next question was related to how the shade tree requirements apply within a neighborhood corridor overlay zone. We currently apply the shade tree requirements when a Title 41 application is required, which means that the proposed development is greater than 5,000 square feet in building area. And so that would still apply within the overlay zone.
Okay.
Your next question is about the discussion on whether or not surface parking needs to be listed as a prohibited use. Looking through the zoning code, I could only find surface parking as an allowable principal use within the R3 zone, and I may not be interpreting that correctly, so if Director Riggs would provide some guidance on that if I am incorrect, that would be helpful. But I didn't find surface parking as an allowable principal use within other zones, especially within our business zones.
Right, that's correct.
So I didn't include that in the list of prohibited uses.
Okay. Because it's already prohibited. Right.
Yeah,
Got it.
essentially.
Okay.
Or it's
Thank
an
you.
accessory use.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah.
Okay.
All right, the next question you had was related to distance/buffering requirements for restaurants to residential zones. The language that I could find in the code is within our B3 zone, and restaurants are listed two different times. One as restaurants and drive-in or drive-through restaurants, and that listing includes a 200-foot buffer for the drive-through related components of a restaurant. So the speaker box or where the business interacts directly with the person in the vehicle. And then drive-in or drive-through establishments have that same 200-foot buffer requirement for R1 and R2 zones. Mm-hmm. Within the overlay zone, we are already listing drive-throughs as a prohibited use, so I don't think that that restaurant buffering issue exists.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. And then I believe we've already addressed your last question, which was about the projections.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So I think, so that this summarizes, what you have just done for us is summarized and answered our questions about the proposed new or language that's been updated for the neighborhood overlay zone. And do we have any comments or questions from the audience before we proceed? Go ahead, Mr. Swank, Councilmember Swank.
Nice to be on this side of the dais for once. Alan Swank, City Council, 4th Ward. A couple things. On this most recent discussion, A, 1, 2, 3, and 4 before you, number 2 says allowable projections shall be projecting, and I agree with President Nisley in this case, allowable projections shall only be, I agree with that statement, projecting signs, canopies, and balconies. When we get to number 3, though, the conversations seem to revolve around just signs, but because it says projections. And I can't imagine limiting canopies and balconies to only 2 feet. I think in particular Donkey Coffee, the River Time Boutique, and countless other places up and down Court Street. Also, the 8-foot thing concerns me a bit. That's 8 feet right there. Tip of my fingers. That's not very high. It's not very high at all. The other thing I think about is I remember John Katowski talking about wanting awnings and things that extend quite a bit, particularly for dining purposes at your last meeting. So I wonder in number 3 if we're talking about projections in general, meaning signs, canopies, and balconies, or are we just talking about signs? So it's something for your consideration. I think you're probably just talking about signs, the way the conversation was just a few minutes ago.
So number 3 does apply to all of those projections. So if there is concern about allowing for greater depth into the right-of-way for canopies and balconies, I believe the Planning Commission could amend that language and either call out signs to only be limited to the 2 feet, since that's how we regulate our B2D zone, and then provide a different projection for the other uses. And I'm not sure, interpretation-wise, if the words canopies and awnings have a different interpretation, and whether or not awnings need to also be included as an allowable projection. But we can definitely amend that language if that concern needs to be addressed.
Okay. Questions, comments, feedback from Planning Commission members?
I mean, I do have a couple thoughts. I think that number 1, that the sign ordinance still applies, right? Because, I mean, that is independent completely unless it specifically calls out. So the size of the sign would still be governed by the provisions in the zoning code related to size. So if you say you projected along a longer distance, you still got to have the same number of square feet, right? So, but I do think that 2 feet is limiting. Now, what we could do is we could say, and the goal somewhat of this effort is, a large part of the goal of this effort is to streamline and make it easier for people to develop their property in these neighborhood corridors. So if we want to go and make that longer, that distance to go into the right-of-way, like as far as the ministerial approval, not having to go to city council, I think we probably could do that. The other option would be to say, more than 2 feet, you still got to get a Title 49 permit. And so it's an extra step. And so I guess it's a question of whether or not we want to have, more latitude before that extra step. And as long as it doesn't go into the street, I think it's fine.
Mayor Patterson?
Yeah, so, Commissioner Stone, are you saying the sign could extend 4 feet out?
Or the balcony or the awning,
Okay.
whatever the thing is sticking out would go more than 2 feet into the right-of-way. If we want to, as long as it doesn't go into the street, without going and getting an extra Title 49 permit.
Okay. I would be more in favor of staying with the sign at 2 feet out over the right-of-way, but an awning, I think of the awning over Donkey, that's got to come out every bit of 4 feet from the facade of the building, which, again, as Councilmember Swank was saying, it provides shade, it provides rain cover, it provides whatever. It's more of a functional awning, which is probably going to have the individual whatever facilities logo on the front of it too. And a balcony, it just harkens back to the days of balconies, talking about balconies on Court Street and whatnot. Being a realist, a 4-foot balcony is a functional balcony. A 3-foot balcony is somewhat, 2 foot is not. 2 foot is an expense for somebody to put something that maybe you can put, a French chair out there or something, or a cafe table, but that's pretty limiting. So I don't know. I would suggest to the commission of maintaining the sign language as we have it in here, but allowing for an awning or a balcony to extend maximum of 4 feet out into the right-of-way, but that's just my thoughts on that.
Do we currently have any 4-foot balconies projecting out? And I don't know if there's a safety concern, maybe not. I can remember the overhang when that came through. That was the regulation at 3 foot, and it came out 3.5?
that was the compromise.
If I could interject, we just, council just approved a 4-foot balcony at 43 South Court Street over the right-of-way. We just did that last session of council.
So that was a Title 49 permit.
Yeah.
That basically what we're saying by changing this is that wouldn't go through council.
It would
in-
just be
in these overlay zones.
just to
up
get
Up to a
approved.
point, and then if it were longer, then it would still have to go through.
So are what we're talking about is potentially amending the language in A3 to say, signs shall not protrude more than 2 feet?
What I would
Or-
recommend is, since number 4 directs all projecting signs to be in compliance,
Thing is exactly on the right-of-way line. There's some places where it sits back 3 or 4 feet. So this is really speaking about the right-of-way, is what
Right.
we're talking about.
that's correct.
Okay. So it sounds like we have this amended language that you have submitted this morning meets with approval of the commission members then to be incorporated into?
I would say other than, Madam Vice Chair, your only comment for
The
number
only,
2,
yep.
and then I would contend switching from 2 to 4 feet for that.
Right, with the
modified
projections
language.
excepting for signs, yeah, shall not, okay. Okay, so if we're amenable, oh, we have another comment, okay, before we,
Well, I'm not finished.
oh. Okay,
I didn't want to interrupt your conversation on that, but
okay.
that's what I was waiting
So we
for.
move forward on
Yeah.
that part.
Okay, the second thing involves the 1,500 square feet for artists and facilities. This room's 1,500 square feet. It's not very big. Where did we come up with this number? It's just kind of seems to me an arbitrary number. For example, if I were to go down to FedEx Kinko's, which would be a classic example if there was residential above it, of a strip of commercial buildings. How large is FedEx Kinko? How large is the AT&T store? Those very well may be more than 1,500 square feet. So I don't see what 1,500 square feet is based on. It just seems like an arbitrary number. And I think before passing that, it might be wise to, and that would be the classic example without the residential above, that strip mall on East State Street, to see each one of those buildings, particularly the smallest ones, because obviously PetSmart is bigger than 1,500 square feet. But the smallest ones, AT&T, I mentioned FedEx Kinko, how big are those? And I think that would be more in line with setting a figure than just arbitrarily picking 1,500 square feet.
Planner Jennings.
I'll say myself and code really discussed the appropriate square footage for these uses, and we landed on 1,500 square feet because that's about a 30 by 50 building, and I believe is slightly larger than this room. But if it is in a row of buildings, and say they have a 25-foot frontage, which is kind of typical for this style of development, that's a 25 by 60, which is a fairly deep building, and is appropriate for this scale of corridor. So that is where that number came from.
Thank you. Well, thank you for clarifying.
Is there a minimum lot size for B2, B1, minimum lot width, like on the bulk controls?
The B1 has a minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet.
But lot width, I'm sorry.
Oh, lot width.
Lot width. I think that'll inform our discussion on those to a certain extent.
B1 lot width is 50 feet.
Okay, so it's minimum,
So that would be a 50 by 30.
30 deep. I know, Chair, I don't mean to continue to ask questions along these lines, but when we do, help me with this, when we do variances related to porches and stuff like that, and setback, front setback, and we look at adjoining parcels as a rule of thumb to compare, how do we do that? Is that, when we talk about front setback, but then someone can't meet the front setback and they look at their neighbors and they say, well, I can't meet the front setback, but all my neighbors don't either. What's the rule that we do that? That's a BZA function, right?
There's actually two ways to do that. One is through the BZA, and BZA would look at that as, minimum variance and, I can't think of what the other term is, but it's all, we also have sections for front setbacks. We have sections in the code that don't need to go to the BZA to have, if you have a house on the left and a house on the right of you, there's a section in the code that defines how close you can get to the right of way that waives that minimum front yard setback. So there's two ways to do that.
And the reason I asked the question, man, is there a way that we could tie this to adjacent properties or properties on the same block, vice a hard square footage in order to keep the scale? But,
To add language in,
Yeah,
perhaps.
yeah, so that-
1,500 square feet or.
yeah, the average square feet of other businesses on the same block. I don't know if that's getting too complicated.
One of the reasons I bring this up is Kindred Market would not work, and there is housing above it. An existing retail on the first floor, housing above it. If we limit it to 1,500 square feet in a new corridor area, Kindred Market cannot go in.
Well, Kindred Market could go in.
A
but
business-
Kindred Market couldn't go and take a metal shop downstairs and cast aluminum or whatever. Downstairs.
Right. So this is 1,500 is only limited to artisan things?
Well, that's those industrial uses.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and let me add, I mean, if you, when we first looked at this and it had the non-permissible uses, a number of these 7 were all in that non-permitted uses, and for obvious reasons, do we want to have industrial foundry to go in, and under that they could. So this puts guardrails on that as well, to where, if it's 1,500 feet, and it's someone who wants to be a silversmith and you want to move into a space, or you want to be, I'll use the person's name, David Griesmeyer, and you want to create beautiful sculptures in there, a space like this, that size would work for that, but you get larger, you kind of have to be careful what you're introducing and what could actually go in, given this definition.
Right. Well, I think also something like Fashion Works couldn't locate there because of their existing size. So what I'm getting at here is when and if this passes the Planning Commission, whatever form it is, it will come to the Planning and Development Committee of City Council. And the cleaner it comes to us, the easier it makes our job and the quicker we can move this through to the ultimate goal. I have just a couple other things. It seems to be one of the primary goals of this whole thing is walkability. And when I think of walkability, I think of when I get to the place, I can walk about it, not necessarily walk to it. I think what's been often cited is the Village Bakery, the Athens Bread Company, and Kindred Market. The majority of those customers in those buildings drive to those buildings. In fact, before the Athens Baking Company changed their hours to opening now at noon, instead of opening at 3 o'clock, you couldn't park in the parking lot there because there were so many people in line. In fact, the last time I went, I was number 17 in line at 15 minutes after 3, and I counted the number of people who left and drove away, and every one of them except 2 got in their car and drove away. So when we're talking about walkability, what are we really talking about here? The ability to walk to the place? Or once you get there, the ability to walk from business to business to business? I say that in the context of what happens with parking. One of the things we're talking about is reducing parking, or in some cases, eliminating parking. Well, anytime Kindred Market has an event in their parking lot, which they do from time to time, and it's a nice addition to the community, where do people park? They jam up Marietta, they jam up North Shannon, and create a parking nightmare. There's an area in Dallas, Texas called the M Streets. It's not too far from SMU University. And there's a whole line of restaurants and clubs along Greenville Avenue. If you went to go to one of those places, and I've been going there since 1984, you end up parking in the residential neighborhoods. I've already had residents say to me, please bring this up as a consideration to the Planning Commission, that if we eliminate too much parking or eliminate it altogether for these as part of this proposal, that we're going to be forcing cars into the adjacent neighborhoods. And for anybody that knows the Near East Side, it's going to be a nightmare Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of this next week when we get somewhere between 8 and 10 inches of snow and all those cars are jamming up the street. We force cars to carry people to these businesses into these neighborhoods. It's going to be a burden on the neighborhood, so it's something to consider. Second thing is, there's one thing that I haven't heard, and that is, what has the economic study, the viability of retail businesses? In other words, is there a demand? Is there a need? I'm not sure, because there are 7 empty businesses out on East State Street, and nobody's going into any of them. Just because we build these, or even if we do build these, who's going to go in? I don't know. But here's the thing that probably concerns me the most. At the last meeting of this body, the following statement was made. Quote, "We are trying to just reduce walls of residential along our corridors." Let me say that again. We are trying, quote, "We are trying to just reduce walls of residential along our corridors." End quote. There are 5 corridors into Athens: East State Street, Stimson Avenue, Richland Avenue, Union Street, and Columbus Road. Which of those 5 have a wall of residential? And what does it mean that we want to reduce these walls of residential? We have a housing crisis in this town. Why would we want to reduce walls of existing residential? And which ones? I don't have the answer, and I ask this body what that means.
I would ask the question, Mr. Swank, do you have who said that and in what context it was said?
It was
Because
said
I know-
approximately that the 42-minute section of the video, and it was said by our city planner. So maybe she can explain what that means and which of those corridors where we have these walls, we're going to reduce the residential.
I realize we're putting you on the spot because we're asking you to recall from 2 months ago.
No, this was just this was the last meeting of this body.
I can't remember what we were talking about at 42 minutes in, but I'm assuming that the wall of residential comment was coming from the discussion about prohibiting residential land uses on the ground floor. I believe my comment would have been made within the intent of saying that with our current proposal for the overlay zone, and especially the setbacks that we are reducing for these developments or new developments along the overlay zone, that if residential was also on the ground floor, the corridors would be lined with just solely residential buildings due to our market demands, as Director Stone alluded to
And
earlier.
similar to the comments, Safety Service Director Stone made. Okay, and so Councilmember Swank, this ends your comments right now. I'm only looking because we've been 50 minutes on this, and I am not wanting to force a vote today, but I want to make sure everybody has their questions and comments addressed. So I'd like to, if you
Yeah, no,
address
that's
those.
fine. That
Thank you.
took care
I
of everything.
appreciate it, and I
Thank you very
appreciate your
much.
perspective as the Planning Commission Committee Chair.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. I'm Rob Delich. I live at 124 Morris Avenue in the Near East Side neighborhood in the city. Just a minor point, so I'm trying to remember what it was exactly. ADHD. So we were talking about the distance that balconies and canopies could extend into the right-of-way of potentially 4 feet. I'm looking at the code, and Director Stone mentioned the idea that, which way I think this is a good idea, to streamline this process and make it more flexible for the developers. That's definitely a good approach here. That in the sign, projecting sign part of the code, there is a statement that says to address not getting into the street. It says the horizontal clearance between the sign's outer dimension and the curb line shall not be less than 2 feet. That, I think, addresses it, but this isn't the sign projection, so we may need to state this if we're going to specify 4 feet for canopies and balconies, to say not 2 feet, it can't be within 2 feet of the curb. Then you eliminate we don't know where the right-of-way is exactly and how far it might actually project, eliminates that problem of potentially allowing it into the street, so.
So Planner Jennings, do you have a suggestion? Thank you, Mr. Delich. Do you have a suggestion on adding that as an insert into that? This would be on the new 4 points that you've submitted this morning.
Yeah, I think Mr. Delich's recommendation is important to include. I would have to just have a second to think on the right way to word that. So I'm pulling up that B2D zoning again. Go ahead, Mayor.
Friendly suggestion, that that the balcony or awning can be up to 4 feet over the public right-of-way, as long as it's not in conflict with the 2-foot requirement from the curb. Therefore, it's to the developer to sit there and figure out, okay, I can only get 2 feet out of this. Do I want to put a balcony or not? Do I want to put an awning or not? If they have the clearance and the distance, then let them move forward. But just so it's not in conflict with the 2 foot from the curb. I think it's pretty simple. Just to add that language in there.
As long as it's not in conflict with regulations on within 2 feet of the curb. Okay. Okay. All right, so we have now 3 suggestions on the language, or 2 suggestions on the language of the 4 items that you've submitted. One would be projections, except for signs, shall not protrude more than, and we've changed 2 feet to 4 feet. And the item above it, number 2, allowable projections shall only be projecting signs, canopies, and balconies. And then we have this last language that Mr. Patterson offered, as long as it is not in conflict with the regulations that bring it within 2 feet of the curb. And we can fuss with that. I think law director would say it's fine tuning if we switch a word or two on the final language. It was that.
Just reference the 2 foot from the curb section.
Yeah. Within
As
2 feet of the
per.
curb. As per.
Yeah, I think
whatever
that
portion
could be
of
a
code.
little confusing, that specific reference, because the B2D signing, that 2 foot is basically from the edge of the building towards the curb. So rather than from the curb towards the building. And so I think maybe better language could read, this may be just a separate sentence. Let's see. Projections shall not be closer than 2 feet from the edge of the curb.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. Read that one more time.
Sure. Projections shall not be closer than 2 feet from the edge of the curb.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. So we have these modifications, and we've also had the concern about the artisan space as to whether that's too limiting. But what we have before us is a case, and so what I would like is a sense from the Planning Commission members, either in the form of a motion to approve or a motion to table, or what the thought is about moving this.
I would like to make a motion to approve predicated upon the suggested amendments that were discussed in today's meeting.
A second.
Okay. So we have a motion and second. Do we have any further questions or discussions?
Just one further thing is Planner Jennings has done a tremendous amount of work on this neighborhood overlay zone concept. And the intent behind this is to promote economic development in the city and to create an interesting place to live. that people want to go to and want to be part of. An option is we could recommend to get rid of all the restrictions on first floor residential citywide, and then we just all order all of our stuff from Amazon, and then we don't go to any retail or restaurant establishments ever. I mean, some cities would do that, but that's not Athens. And so I would commend you for your work that you've done, and a lot of times people say, do the right thing, do the wrong thing, but do something. So I would contend that this planning commission is attempting to do something by coming up with this idea and forwarding it to city council for consideration.
And I would offer that while I am not listening to Councilmember Swank's concerns about it, I'm also listening to what the planner and the code director have said, that there is a fair amount of discussion about the 1,500-foot limitations on that at this point. So if no other comments or questions, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor of approving the case 2508, the neighborhood corridor overlay zone, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And no nays, so I think that's unanimous. We'll move on now to communications, the first one being the Dairy Lane rezoning for Ridges redevelopment with the 317 board, and we thank you very much for waiting the 57 minutes to present. And we have received in our packet the application with some maps, and I know this is communications today. I did convey to Director Riggs that it would be really helpful to see those maps maybe when the case comes forward, so that we can share them with the public as well. So there's some good maps and good design layouts in there. So yes.
Yes, so I'll briefly introduce this case. The 317 board is receiving land from the Ridges Community Authority redevelopment project. They have not received that yet because the process is still getting approved at the state, but they have a forthcoming funding deadline that would get them, I believe, an additional $2 million. David Mott will correct me if I'm wrong on that, which would help them develop their project that they're here to ask for a rezoning today. They currently have land out on Dairy Lane, and the land that they would be acquiring from the Ridges is immediately adjacent to their property to the west. And so this rezoning request is to allow for the 317 board to build additional supportive housing. And the request is to rezone, the property is currently zoned EI because it's a part of the Ridges and owned by Ohio University. And so they are asking to rezone that to an R3. I will let David Mott present the rest of the information to you all.
Thank you, Ms. Jennings. I'm Attorney David Mott with Malika Gallstone and Sillery, and I am here representing Athens, Hocking, Vinton Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board, which I will never say again. It is the 317 board from here on out. Where to begin? The 317 board has been pursuing a project like this for 15 years. When the Bridges redevelopment proposal came around, this was able to be included in that overall proposal. And has been progressing since then. Conveniently, another challenge with this is getting it funded. There is a potential for $2 million of funding available. That is OFA funding. That funding is essential to the project. Where it really gets fun is that funding was supposed to be available on an application cycle for next year. And in the late fall, OFA announced that they were accelerating it, and it would be available for applications in 2026, one piece of which is the 317 board has to be able to demonstrate that the property complies with the local zoning by March 12th of this year. Unfortunately, this is not one of those programs where if they can't get everything together in time for this application, they can come back next year. It is quite possible that this funding may never be available again, or at least not within the foreseeable future. It would be several years at a minimum before this could come up again if they are not able to get into this round of funding. I believe you have the proposal to Ohio University. The reason it is to Ohio University is because they still own the land. The 317 board is here with a request because they don't actually have standing to put in an application. They don't own the land, they don't have a purchase contract, they don't have a lease, they don't meet the requirements under the Athens City Code to put in an application for rezoning. All we can do is come forward and ask, which is what we're doing. So this is the proposal to Ohio University. They're moving through their processes. They have to go through certain steps before they can give formal support. We have received no opposition from them, but it hasn't made it through enough that we can say they formally support it either. We also have, at this point, support from Joe Recchi, who is taking the lead on designing all of the development aspects for the Ridges redevelopment project. I actually have printouts of that if anyone is interested in seeing those. And I will be happy to discuss the project and the details and so forth, but first I just want to mention the timing bind that we're in. Typically, this body accepts something like this as a communication and then comes back to it at its next meeting as a case and takes a vote. Unfortunately, that creates a major timing problem for the 317 board. I spoke in some detail with Debbie Walker yesterday about the timeline. The one part of this entire process that has no flexibility is the public hearing and the requirement that notice of that hearing has to be published at least 30 days in advance. That notice cannot be published until this body has voted out a recommendation to City Council, and then the Planning and Development Committee of City Council has forwarded it to the full council. And so with those steps involved, where we are is that if this body votes it out today with a recommendation to rezone, we can meet the 30-day requirement for the publication and meet the March 12th deadline from OFA to demonstrate zoning, or at least get to a third reading and a vote. And if the city says no, the city says no. If it does not get voted out today, either this body and City Council would have to hold special sessions to accelerate the front end of the process so we could get something in the newspaper, or we would have no chance of meeting that deadline. What this body chooses to do is at its discretion. My understanding is that the code does not require you to hold a communication and then come back to it later as a case. If this is going to be rezoned, I would note that the code states that this body on its own motion would have to recommend the rezoning. Yes, Mayor.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I believe you all had an opportunity to review the packet. I'm happy to discuss this in however much detail you would like.
Yes.
So I've been looking at this a lot, and I thank Diane for alerting me to this effort, and I'm fully aware of OFA and how things, when opportunity's there, you've got a really tight window. There is surrounding R3 in this area. When you're out on Dairy Lane, you have the Clem House, we have the Adam Amanda Rehabilitation Center that's right there. Both of those are R3. I believe that 317 or Dairy Barn is a B. And then again, as was indicated, you've got educational, the Educational Institution Zone, which is EI zoning. And so the request, as was indicated, is an R3 multi-unit, which would fit with what's gone down there. We've gone to great lengths on Dairy Lane to make improvements, most notably to make it more accessible. Back in the day, for those of you who remember, Dairy Lane was when you got out to the Clem House or you got near the Adam Amanda Rehabilitation Center, you had to walk in the street to get where you're going. That is not the case anymore.
Fire protection and sewer.
Oh, and fire, thank you, Andy. Fire protection and sewer and newly laid bricks, which look really nice down there, a rehabbed bridge. I can go on and on and on. And with the new community authority in that corridor in the future, also going to be putting in some homes along Dairy Lane. I would like this body to consider, in whichever way we want to, but a motion to approve that is ultimately predicated upon getting the state and everybody else to be in alignment, but we're sending a signal to where we think this is an appropriate use to have this rezoned R3, and of course it would go before City Council. So
Other comments or questions?
I
Yes.
never know the appropriate moment for this, I apologize, but I have a professional relationship with the 317 board, and so I would like to recuse myself from discussion or vote were it to come to that. So thank you.
Okay, and so the or the majority, so it would be the majority of those present today, and we still have the quorum with all the three of us voting? Okay, potentially, okay.
Although,
Pardon me.
while the 378 board is involved, they're not making this request because they can't.
Correct.
It's the planning commission that is the entity that's pushing it forward to council because
Right.
the process-wise, it's.
Right.
But, I mean, you
As
can
long
always.
as I'm doing what is appropriate.
Sure,
and-
sure.
I'd rather err on the side of caution, so if I'm
And it
able.
should probably just as well to err on the side of caution on this one, I think, with recusing yourself, so.
Thank you.
But thanks for bringing up the point. So, and I do know that, staff from the 317 board have been involved with following the ridges and the university and the whole development of this area. And from all that I have heard from both public members, members of the new community authority, that this would be a positive asset to the community to have this development, so.
Do you have a question?
Yes.
So, and Mr. Mott, perhaps you can answer, perhaps any of your colleagues. So I've sat on this dais on other OFA-funded project rezoning requests over the last couple of years, and I've watched them come before here, and I've watched them go before city council, and people have come out of the woodwork opposed to the projects. Why is this one different?
This one is different for a couple of reasons. One, it is in a lightly developed area. It is not going to have the same sort of community impacts and neighborhood impacts that the other projects would. The surrounding owners are the state of Ohio and the 317 board. Those are the only adjacent property owners. If you expand beyond that, there's some property across the street that has some private ownership, which I believe is zoned R3. And then there is the dairy barn. That's the extent of it in this area. This is also not a major development. This is looking at a total of 15 single-bedroom units for people who are able to live independently and just having trouble finding housing. Of course, they'd have to meet the 317 board's service requirements. But it's, for example, the next item on your agenda is residential facilities. This is not a residential facility. It's just housing. This is all intended for single-story development. It's not going to block out the sky. It's not going to cause shadows. It will have a minimal impact, if any, on any kind of hillside stability. It is designed as light development to provide some much-needed housing to a very vulnerable portion of our community, potentially becoming more vulnerable depending on what happens with the continuum of care funding. This is, frankly, it's out of the way. It's semi-secluded, close enough to town to still be relatively accessible, and it does not disrupt the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, comments? Yes. Senator Jennings.
I'll just clarify, because this piece of property has not yet been carved out from the larger parcel, this rezoning would be just rezoning a portion of an existing parcel, but we have the survey of the proposed parcel that will be carved out, so we would follow those exact lines. And those dimensions and that proposed parcel are page 31 of the packet, just for your reference.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I appreciate all the input. Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Swank.
Yes, very quickly, speaking to the schedule, Alan Swank, if this body were to take this up today as a case and vote on it, the schedule would simply be, today it would be approved by you, assuming that you would approve it. It would come before council next Monday, the 26th, which is a regularly scheduled committee night. It could then be published in the newspaper, publication of general circulation on Saturday, January 31st. Council would hear it at first reading on the 2nd of February. Council would hear it at second reading, on the 17th of February. Council would hear it on the third reading on March the 2nd, all regularly scheduled, regular meetings, and we would be able to have the hearing on March the 2nd, which would give us time to meet the deadline. If this body would not take it as a case today, the only way we could possibly meet that March 12th deadline is for you to have a special session of this body next Wednesday, which would allow us to get it through on March the 9th, a mere 3 days before the deadline. So I would encourage you, based on what Mr. Mott presented, and particularly his answer to Director Stone's comments about concerns, that you take this up as a case today so that we can get this proposal, this rezoning done for badly needed housing, and very appropriate housing with a roof, with heat, and supervision both sides. And we've had both the Clem House and the other property out there for many, many years without any problems, and providing needed housing for those who truly do need it. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for the comments. Yes, Mr. Patterson.
I would like to make a motion.
Thank you. I'll second.
Well, let me, thank you.
We're assuming approval, but I should not assume. I'll let you detail.
I would like to make a motion to approve this request to be passed on to City Council. Also, I have a comment to make, and that is with the new community authority and what you're going to see moving forward with the Ridges Complex and along Dairy Lane, to the point of it being a corridor, as has been mentioned here today, that is, I'm paraphrasing, out of the way. I'm sorry, we're all one species, we're all one people, and whatever your issue is, whatever someone is struggling with, whatever their challenge is, to me, I view this very differently. This is creating a corridor that is finally going to bring everyone together, even those who purchase the homes that'll be along Dairy Lane, to where we heal ourselves as people, as community members. So I'm jump off my soapbox.
Thank you for being altruistic. Yes. It's important. Absolutely. Yes.
And the only discussion point I would have is it's not a request, it's a recommendation from Planning Commission to Council.
Correct.
Because it's not, so,
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion and second.
for changing the zone.
And any other comments? All right, all in favor? Signify by saying aye. And we have one abstention. Yes, thank you. Okay, so the recommendation carries forward.
Thank you.
All right. The next item of communication is the zoning text amendment to address the residential facilities as defined in revised code 5119.34.
All right, so this item is being brought up because there are some existing residential facilities here in Athens, and I believe that we want to have a conversation about how we want to regulate those in our local zoning. There are regulations in the Ohio Revised Code that I think that we can follow, and we can also, our authority as like a local governing body is to regulate the density of these uses. The residential facilities per ORC are allowed in residential zones. They have different density requirements for R1 versus multifamily. And so, let me see, I'm pulling up my document here. And what I mean by density is they have a limit of the number of residents staying in those homes. I apologize, I left my paper copy on my desk, which was highlighted, and so I'm scrolling through my Word document.
Okay.
Okay.
And this is a communication today.
Yes.
Saying we're going to bring it forward for further discussion. Okay.
Sure, I asked, Madam Chair, I asked the planner to put this on the agenda specifically so that we can discuss it. We've had a couple instances come up recently about land use, and specifically land use in R1 zones. And currently our code permits residential healthcare facilities in R1 zones, but we also have a restriction on the number of unrelated people that can live in one. And what happens is the Ohio Revised Code preempts local law. And so that Ohio Revised Code basically says that you can't put a restriction at least up to 5 unrelated people. And our code in a single-family home says 3 unrelated people in those situations, basically. And so that's one area where we're preempted. Another area is that you can't zone them out. So and they're not zoned out right now, but you can't. Is what the state law says. However, the state law does say that you can limit density. And this body a few years ago or a few months ago, maybe a year ago, I forget when it was, limited density of vape shops in our various zones. So there can't be more than a certain number. And so I asked the planner to bring this up because we've received quite a few concerns from residents about this type of use in our R1 zone specifically. So David, I don't know if you'd want to give any more.
No, that's
background
great.
on it.
We have several of these facilities and more coming, and so we want to try to get a handle on it before this becomes more of an issue than we've seen so far. So one of the things as we said, we can't control the regulation. We can't deny these uses in that zone because of state law, but we can, we think, control the density of those uses. And just like we did for the cannabis establishments and the vape shops, we could say, they can be, however many hundred of feet apart. So we could control the density. So we don't have 2 or 3 of these types of facilities in one neighborhood, which we wouldn't want to see.
So you're saying density per neighborhood, and am I understanding correctly that state regulations say no more than 5?
This is what we're talking about with 5 is the number of people that are staying inside of the facility. They actually they actually control that at the state level with A, B, and C type facilities, and I think that A facility is no more than a maximum of 5 people in the facility. And as Andy said, we have no more than 3 unrelated is what our code says.
So we can't. So
We're preempted.
we're
Yeah.
preempted.
Right.
But we do have a restriction that 5 or less, or a maximum of 5.
The state does.
State
We
does.
have 3.
But we
unrelated.
can't supersede in this case because we don't have standing with something that the state may say they have regulations on. So we fall under the 5 is what I'm trying to get at.
Correct.
What's the limit
Correct.
right now, 5?
In those type of facilities,
5.
correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And they have to
And
be
we're
allowed
going to
at any
discuss
zone.
further about density and how many in a neighborhood or. Yeah.
That's what the city can regulate that, the density.
Okay.
The city can't prohibit them, but they can regulate density, and the city could also add additional permitting requirements as a condition of a zoning permit. And that's probably what we would, because this would be a zoning change, and so the planning commission would need to forward this to council to.
Right, right. Okay, well, thank you. It sounds like it needs to be, it's come up recently, and it sounds like it needs to, be addressed. Okay, any other comments or questions? Yes, we've got,
Third time's a charm. Alan Swank, Fourth Ward. Reason I'm involved in this came to light prior to Christmas. We have 2 facilities we know of, one on Madison and one on Lorraine. And in both cases, there have been calls to the police, the one on Madison for very serious concerns. One thing that I would mention is at the current time, House Bill 58 is in the Ohio House right now. And essentially what House Bill 58 will do, it will establish this certification of need program for these recovery homes. It will mandate annual inspections by the local, use Mr. Mott's terms, 317 board rather than all the counties, and finally creates a process for investigating complaints and possibly removing problematic facilities. The interesting thing about this bill in the Ohio House, it is sponsored by both a registered Democrat and a registered Republican, bipartisan support. So that's something we could follow very, very closely. And in terms of density, yes, I think using the process we use for the marijuana dispensaries would be very, very appropriate. I would ask Director Riggs a question, though, not putting you on the spot. I mentioned 2. Are there others here already in town? You don't have to identify where, but how many do we have? How many?
We have a list. Hang on, Lance has got it.
Okay, that's fine.
Give me 1 minute.
Yeah, the other thing is,
Approximately 8 other ones.
eight other ones, wow. The other thing is, the 2 that I know of are companies, for-profit companies, out of town that have purchased property here in town or have partnered with an existing owner of a property and are renting these here in town. So unlike what we heard earlier with the 317 board, what we know with the Gathering Place, what we know with Hopewell Health, what we know with integrated services, there is no local on-site monitoring of these facilities. And that's a bit scary. So that's another thing. I don't know if when we're talking about density, we can do that and still be in compliance with state code. But again, when I'm getting calls, emails, and texts, the police are out here again, it becomes a concern for safety in the neighborhood. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Hi, Eric Lee, 7 3rd Street, and I actually own the property at 51 Madison. So we were approached by that company that runs the residential treatment at 51 Madison, and we felt it would be a fair housing violation to turn them down. So we allowed them to use that. They definitely should follow the local rules and regulations and laws, and I have no objection to requiring local permits. I don't think it's quite fair to compare a residential treatment facility to a vape shop or a place where you can buy weed. I feel like if people need help, we shouldn't limit the number of places in the city of Athens where they can get help. So that's my biggest concern. And those two facilities, I believe, are not owned by the 317 board, and comments about them probably should not get directed to the 317 board. So.
I didn't imply they were.
Okay, sorry, my bad then.
Said that they weren't like 317
Yeah,
board.
yeah, 317 board does an awesome job with their facilities. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes.
Director Riggs, remind me, because this is so long ago, it seems. I'm thinking of the conversations that went on primarily in council about short-term rentals and a short-term rental, being operated by someone who does not reside in the city of Athens. I think that was restricted within R1s in particular, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. On certain streets,
On certain streets.
in an R1.
Yeah, there was certain streets, thank you. And then there was, distance regulations on a short-term rental and things of that nature. But I think the most critical piece was, again, whom is responsible, who is within the city or resides locally to be able to assist and respond if there's an issue that's going on. I suggest maybe looking at that language too, because it already exists.
Yeah. Yeah, we can certainly do that, sir.
Now, I would have the question of, what are options for regulating density? Like, I think we've talked about distance, we've talked about, quantity, like, can you throw out a couple of those?
Well, those are the two we were thinking of. So you could have a distance between facilities. So if you have a facility, the next closest facility could be 300 feet, 500 feet, whatever you want, so that you don't have clusters of these facilities in one neighborhood. The other way you could do it, which is what we did, I think, with the vape shops, is to limit the total number in a zoning district. So if you have only certain number in a R1 zone total, and certain number in R2 zone, certain number of them allowed in R3 zone, and you could regulate them that way, or you could do both.
And in those instances, we actually broke down the various, I think these were B zones. We broke down the various B zones around the city, and we said, okay, like B3A and B3B
Yes.
and B3D. I think because we only have so something similar.
Yeah, you could subdivide those instead of just all R1s. You could do R1s on in the Far East neighborhood, R1s in the Central District, and that kind of thing. Yes.
Okay, thanks. Good comments. Yep. And you're thinking, do you have anything else?
Well, I think as we're discussing this and exploring this, I think, we also need to be mindful and over the fact that, when it comes to people in recovery, people with various mental health challenges and things like that, I mean, what used to be done decades and decades ago is segregate. You segregate them. And so I don't know the intent behind the preemption coming from the State House. But I think we also need to be mindful of the fact that we cannot segregate people based upon their conditions. And as we're continuing this conversation, I'm just saying that out loud to everybody. We have the Metropolitan Housing Authority here in the city of Athens that is providing housing that is embedded in our R1 neighborhoods all over the place that are serving a sundry of different people in our community. And just have to get that out there when we're discussing something like this.
Yeah.
Sir, I think to that point, I mean, I think some sort of regulation of density actually achieves that, because it lends itself to not clustering, right? To your point, saying we want to put all of these in this street right here, and we don't want them anywhere else in the city. That's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about limiting quantity in one location.
Thanks. We'll welcome the discussion and the additional information. I think that'll be helpful. Okay. We have reports. Is there any additional reporting that the code office?
The code office doesn't have anything.
Okay.
I do not as either.
You've had plenty for us today. Both of you have. And we welcome your support and helping us with the discussion today. We've got an opportunity for citizens to speak about items not covered on the agenda. Is there anybody else wanting to make a comment about items we have not already covered? If not, we'll have our next meeting on February 4th. And are there any other announcements that we need to be making for the commission? Okay. Motion to adjourn?
I move.
I'll second. Okay. We'll consider ourselves.